My name is Sandra Liebenberg. I am from South Africa. I've had a long history in human rights law in South Africa, including during the apartheid era, doing public interest litigation for people who were forcibly removed from their land and their housing during apartheid. I then did a master's in England, and I was appointed to chair the Bill of Rights Technical Committee when South Africa was drafting its new constitution. So I worked on that, and then I've had, academic and research jobs since then, most of which have been dedicated to making economic, social, and cultural rights real through litigation, advocacy, legislation drafting. And then most recently, I've just finished a term on the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and I was elected vice chair for a period on the committee. The work is very, very interesting because it is combining, both, firstly, it's covering such a broad field. I mean, the covenant rights are very broad, from right to housing, labor rights, cultural rights, social security. So it really needs a lot of expertise in a very broad field of law. Secondly, through the state periodic reporting procedure, which is the bulk of the committee's work, you have to deal with very diverse countries throughout the world, whether it's like a developing country, a developed country, and you've got to get very quickly up to the situation, learn the laws, the policies, what the key human rights issues are. So that's both stimulating and challenging because it gives you this very global picture of what's happening with economic and social rights. I mean, another interesting part of the work is what we've been discussing now at this workshop was the individual communications under the optional protocol. And I think that was fascinating for me as a lawyer who's worked on justiciability of ESC rights to actually help to work on the founding jurisprudence of this committee, which is so important to its legitimacy going forward, So that was very interesting. I think for me, what was a bit of a learning experience is, I come from a civil society and an academic background, and I'm not very acquainted with the diplomatic environment. And, when you're functioning on a committee like that with 18 experts that you have to reach consensus on different issues with, and you've got state parties that you have to engage on constructive dialogue with, you have to learn to be principled, but also diplomatic in how you put things and persuasive and that. So that was sort of something which was, I had to learn and be a skill that I had to get on top of. But yeah, altogether, it was just a wonderful experience, very good colleagues, and very enriching. Well, I think it's absolutely a fundamental committee. I mean, economic and social rights, along with civil and political rights, are both integrated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For ideologically and political reasons, the two covenants were split into the two groups of rights. And I think economic and social rights have always suffered and lagged behind civil and political rights. So I think the work work of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights is really critical in terms of making economic and social rights feel like real human rights, that they can be monitored, that they can be enforced as human rights, that they're not just aspirations or political objectives. And, I could just draw on my experience when we were drafting the Bill of Rights in the South African Constitution, and the question of economic and social rights came up, and, should they be included and how could they be included? It was very influential for us that the committee had developed a set of doctrines, that it had concepts like minimum core obligations, progressive realization, that could be used, adapted, not directly taken into the domestic context, but it was an inspiration to many of the activists and lawyers to ensure that the new South African Constitution included economic, social and cultural rights. And I think this could be an experience actually for a number of countries. So yes, I think this committee is very critical. Yeah, great question. And the answer would be absolutely yes, that I think human rights are, a tool to fight poverty. We should be careful that they're not seen as the only tool, and, that we also recognize that there are other approaches to social justice, that can also help in the struggle against poverty. But I think human rights have a lot to say about poverty, because the core values of human rights are really human dignity, equality, and freedom. And the condition of poverty, I believe, is actually inconsistent with all those three core values. And I think by putting the focus on those values, human rights gives us such an important lens for seeing poverty. And also the idea that poverty is not just a matter of charity, of asking for good things, but they're matters of rights that should be claimed, and there should be a remedy for their violation. And then to the second part of your question, how can they be used to challenge poverty? I think human rights gives us many tools at national and international and regional levels. The litigation side is just one small corner of it. It's an important corner, because ultimately, when everything else fails, there should be a judicial body that can give a remedy. But, there's also questions of, the monitoring. There's institutions like national human rights institutions, ombudspeople, there's civil society mobilization, parliamentary committees that could focus on human rights. And then, of course, all the international tools, from the special mandate holders, reporting procedures, the complaints mechanisms. So I think, human rights gives us a lot of toolboxes, but, we should also not be naive and starry-eyed. We should also look very carefully at what are the limitations, what are the strategic advantages of one tool rather than another tool, and, sort of make wise decisions, because, human rights are all those tools also, as we learned with the optional protocol today, also have limitations and disadvantages. So yes, but in principle, yes, I think human rights are an important tool. I think it's had an absolutely massive impact. obviously on right to health first and foremost, because people are dying, but then because of obviously all the containments and lockdown measures adopted, it's affected cultural rights, religious right, people's ability to worship. It's devastated economies, and people have lost their jobs, and people have gone hungry. School children have not been able to be in school. So it's had a very, very profound impact at every level of economic, social, and cultural rights. And I think initially with the pandemic, there was a lot of understanding of the importance of economic and social rights, and the idea that we would build back better, and there would be stimulus packages and an economic recovery. But at the same time, we also see that many developing countries in particular are facing massive, including my own, massive budget deficits. Many are going to face reduced levels of growth. So the prospects of actually helping people recover from the COVID pandemic, have been quite constrained by this budget context. And it's really going to show that we need, this core principle of the covenant, international assistance and cooperation. So support for developing countries, debt relief, of course, the whole question of the vaccine, and, global solidarity instead of global nationalism or apartheid, as it's put around the vaccine, is going to be so critical for a sustainable recovery from the pandemic. I mean, I think the one lesson, coming out of the global financial crisis, many governments disinvested from their healthcare systems, from social expenditure programs. And when the pandemic hit, those governments, were not so well equipped because their healthcare systems had been eroded and their social protection systems. So, really, I think the challenge for us now going forward is to learn the lessons of the pandemic and really put a renewed effort into rebuilding, public healthcare systems, social security systems, and so forth. I mean, I think what I would choose to focus on is, the news coverage, which is increasingly coming up, in the lead up to the conference of the parties in Glasgow about climate change, and many of the reports that are coming up now in the media about sort of, that global heating is, sort of even more extreme, that, we really are facing massive biodiversity losses, and so forth. And this is, such an existential challenge that we face to humanity. And so, while economic and social rights are important for people, the health of the planet is absolutely critical for economic and social rights, because, without the natural ecosystems, we can't have healthy lives, we can't have food, we can't have, decent housing, and so forth. So I think, with the global COP summit in Glasgow coming up for the UN Convention on Climate Change, I think it really is a call to action for the world. It feels like almost it's humanity's last chance to sort of deal with this existential crisis and to address, these challenges of climate change, poverty, and inequality. So, yes, I think Firstly, I would say that, it's really important, even if it's tough to initially get into it, to be persistent because, you have to, if you are interested and it's your passion, you should really pursue that, even if it means sometimes you take a different route, but you should do that. I would say my second point would be that increasingly human rights draws on a very diverse set of skills. So the more one can build up, generic skills, whether they are research skills, computer skills, language skills, all of this is going to make you more attractive to, because, human rights research also involves statistics, it involves knowledge of economic systems, it involves knowledge of political economy. So, broadening your field is also very important. And then I suppose finally, I think, I mean, the networks are important. So, to keep in touch with fellow students from across the world. Many of my own students have got breaks through meeting students in other countries at conferences that then send them a job application, that make a recommendation for them. So, I think to realize we, the human rights community, is small and interconnected, and to really sort of cultivate your contacts. And then to my final word would be just to say, really to believe in yourself, I think, and your voice and what you have to contribute, because I think these are complex issues. No one has all the solutions to these problems we face. And I think, your voice and your contribution is important. Your doctoral studies or your master's studies have something important to add to the field. So not to hide under, not to be shy, to put yourself forward, to put your perspectives forward. And, yeah, hopefully you think you will get that dream job that you are looking for.